Step out onto the porch.
I am at my door with my hands visible. Show me the warrant.
Step out and we'll talk.
No. Address verification first. I'm not stepping into floodlights surrounded by vehicles.
Copy, holding.
The street was dead quiet until the lights hit. Just after midnight, a nice team rolled in fast, parked in angles that boxed the house in, and flooded the front of the property with bright beams like they were building a perimeter. Caleb Monroe was at the doorway within seconds, not stepping out, not turning his body, not giving them any movement they could misread. He kept his hands visible the entire time. From the first command, the lead agent treated the encounter like a pressure test. Get the occupant outside first, sort the paperwork later. Now quick, tell us where you're watching from. What city or state? And if you like stories where people stay calm, document everything and force accountability the right way, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Here's what was happening in real time. The lead agent pushed the whole thing like a compliance test. He wanted the occupant outside, under lights, surrounded and separated from the cameras on the house. Caleb Monroe didn't take the bait. He stayed in the threshold, shoulders square, hands open, voice controlled. He kept the conversation on one point. They needed to display the warrant on camera and confirm the address before anyone moved. That was the first chess move. Caleb made the interaction about paperwork and verification, not fear and obedience. In situations like this, the person who controls the frame controls the outcome. The agent didn't like it. He treated procedure like an insult. He acted like asking to see documentation was the same as refusing orders. That's a common tactic in high-pressure encounters. Relabel a lawful request as non-compliance, so the escalation sounds justified later. Caleb didn't argue the label. He didn't debate tone. He didn't match energy. He just repeated the same requirement and kept his body still. No stepping onto the porch. No reaching around inside the doorway. No turning his back to anyone. Nothing that could be misread at night under floodlights by a nervous team holding authority and momentum. Natalie Monroe backed him up from just inside the entry, close enough to be heard, but not in anyone's line of sight. She didn't threaten. She didn't plead. She announced facts. The exterior cameras were recording. The doorbell camera was recording. They were documenting names, vehicles, and decisions in real time. That statement mattered. It told the agents two things. First, this wasn't going to be a story they could summarize however they wanted later. Second, every choice they made from that point forward would have a timestamp. The lead agent tried a different angle. If he couldn't get Caleb to step out, he tried to make Caleb prove who he was. He demanded identification, acted like the resident owed it immediately, and pressed for Caleb to move around inside the doorway to fetch something. Caleb refused for a simple reason. Movement is risk. In these situations, especially at night, reaching becomes going for something in somebody else's report. Caleb didn't give them that option. He kept his hands visible and told them he would not start moving around under floodlights, with agents positioned around his home. He repeated that a supervisor needed to respond and the warrant needed to be shown on camera. The lead agent kept pushing the same script. Exit first, talk later. Caleb kept denying the script. Paperwork first, address verification first, supervisor first. This is where the power game gets obvious. The team had numbers and posture. Caleb had a threshold, cameras, and discipline. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He was trying to prevent a dangerous misunderstanding and create a clean record. The agent's posture started to shift from confident to irritated. Not because Caleb was loud or disrespectful, but because he wasn't giving them a lever. They couldn't use fear. They couldn't use confusion. They couldn't get him away from the cameras. And they couldn't claim they asked nicely and he refused to cooperate because his request was basic. Show the warrant and confirm the address. Natalie stayed consistent. She continued documenting. She called out details out loud as she captured them. vehicle placement, unit markings, the fact that the home's security system was actively recording. She didn't do it for drama. She did it for the record. At that point, the lead agent tried to reframe the entire scene as if Caleb was the problem. He repeated the idea that Caleb's insistence on documentation was obstruction. He used that word the way people use it when they want a shortcut, as a pressure tool. Caleb didn't let that hook land. He kept the same calm posture. He asked again for the supervisor. He asked again for the warrant displayed clearly. He asked again for address verification. Then, the supervisor finally arrived. You could feel the difference even without hearing a tone change. The supervisor asked questions instead of issuing commands. He wanted to know why the resident wasn't coming out and what the team had already presented. That alone told you something important. The lead agent had moved fast, but not clean. Caleb stayed careful. He still didn't step outside. He didn't walk toward the vehicles. He didn't turn this into a personality contest. He made it procedural and safe. And only after the supervisor was there, only after the situation had a higher level of control, Caleb disclosed something he had intentionally held back. He was a deputy U.S. Marshal. This part matters because people misunderstand it. Caleb wasn't hiding who he was for ego. He was controlling risk. In chaotic late-night encounters, "I'm federal" can trigger the wrong kind of reaction from the wrong kind of person. He waited until there was supervision, structure, and a clearer chain of responsibility. Under those safer conditions, he presented credentials without sudden movements and without stepping into the open. The supervisor took it seriously immediately because credentials change liability. They change the stakes, and they change how fast a team realizes they can't bluff their way through an address check. That's when Caleb pushed the conversation into the corner it belonged in from the start. The warrant, the address, the legal basis for surrounding a family home at night. The supervisor signaled for the warrant to be produced in a way that could be seen and recorded. The lead agent hesitated, because now the record wasn't going to be their internal summary. It was going to be video. And this is the moment where everything started to fall apart. Because when the paper finally came out, it wasn't going to match the Monroe house. The moment the warrant finally came up where a camera could see it, the whole operation started losing oxygen. The lead agent had been loud and absolute for 15 minutes, but paperwork doesn't care about volume. Caleb Monroe kept his hands visible, kept his feet planted, and kept the conversation locked to one thing: address verification on record. The supervisor took over the interaction in a way that made it obvious he understood the risk. He asked for the warrant to be displayed clearly, and he asked the team to confirm the address out loud. That second request mattered just as much as the first, because it forced a public commitment. It meant nobody could later claim they verified something they never actually checked. Caleb didn't gloat. He didn't start lecturing. He simply directed the process, like someone used to making tense scenes safer. He had already done the hard part. He kept everyone from turning a paperwork issue into a physical incident. Natalie stayed on task. She stated again that recording was active and that they were documenting identifiers in real time. She didn't say it like a threat. She said it like a reminder. Every decision had a receipt. When the warrant was held up, the camera captured enough to lock the key detail. The address on the document did not match the Monroe home, and you could hear it in how the energy shifted. The lead agent stopped giving clean commands and started trying to manage perception. He moved from "do this now" to "let's just take a minute," and "there may be a discrepancy," and "we'll sort it out." That pivot is always the tell. When the facts show up, the posture changes. Caleb didn't let the word discrepancy soften it. He treated it like what it was: a wrong address on a high-pressure, late-night operation aimed at the wrong home. He asked the supervisor to acknowledge the mismatch clearly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The video did the heavy lifting. The supervisor conferred with the lead agent, then with someone over radio. The perimeter started to loosen. The bright lights didn't shut off instantly, But the team's body language changed. There was less confidence in the angles, less urgency in the stance, and more movement back towards vehicles. That's the part people miss. When an operation is legitimate, the team wants a clean record. When it isn't, the team wants a clean exit. The lead agent tried to slide the moment into a quiet retreat. He signaled the group to pull back like this was a normal, no-contact situation. No apology. No acknowledgement of the pressure they brought to the wrong door. Just an attempt to erase the escalation by leaving quickly. Caleb did not allow that. He kept his position and asked for identifiers before anyone left. He requested the lead agent's name, badge number, and the supervisor's information. He asked for the incident number tied to the attempted warrant service. He requested the case reference attached to the warrant. He also requested the office field contact for follow-up. The lead agent tried to deny the request at first, implying Caleb didn't have a right to any of it. That was the last grasp at control. He had lost the address, so he tried to keep the narrative. Caleb didn't argue rights in circles. He asked the supervisor, directly, to provide the identifiers and the incident number. He made it clear he was preserving footage and would be filing formal records requests and complaints. And he wanted the information that prevented the story from being rewritten. Natalie backed that up by stating again that the cameras were capturing vehicle plates and unit markings. She didn't say it with attitude, she said it with certainty. The team could refuse to speak, but they couldn't refuse the lens. At that point, the supervisor did what supervisors do when they realize a situation is indefensible. He started reducing exposure. He provided enough information to create a traceable record. He confirmed the team was disengaging due to an address issue. He instructed the lead agent to stand down and move the vehicles. It wasn't a victory speech. It was damage control. The vehicles repositioned. The lights started to swing away. The radio chatter shifted from control the scene to close it out. Caleb still didn't step outside. He didn't chase them down the driveway. He didn't escalate. He stayed consistent and safe until the last vehicle was gone. Then, the real work started. Inside, Caleb and Natalie moved like people who understood exactly how stories get cleaned up after the fact. They didn't rely on memory. They relied on documentation. Caleb immediately preserved the footage. He made redundant copies. He documented the time the first vehicle arrived, the time the first command was issued, the time the supervisor arrived, and the exact moment the warrant was displayed. He wrote a timeline while it was still fresh, because timelines written later get attacked as reconstructed. Timelines written immediately read like evidence. Natalie compiled what she had: visible unit markings, vehicle plate numbers, names that were spoken, and the key moments where the lead agent labeled lawful requests as non-compliance. She also noted the attempted pressure points, the demand to exit first, the attempt to force identity proof while discouraging safe movement, and the effort to withdraw without leaving a record. Caleb then did something important that most people don't do. He prepared for the next phase like it was inevitable, because it was. He drafted formal records requests the next morning. Body camera logs, dispatch logs, supervisor call-in records, the warrant copy, any operational plan notes, and any after-action report. He filed complaints in the correct channels instead of venting in the wrong places. He requested confirmation of receipt. He requested case numbers. He created a paper trail that would survive any internal attempt to summarize the night into something harmless. This is where the story stops being about a scary night and becomes about accountability. Because when agencies realize there's clean video, clean timestamps, clean identifiers, and a person who knows how investigations work, the question shifts from, can we explain this away, to how bad is this going to get? And the answer was, bad enough that an internal review couldn't ignore it. What happened next didn't look dramatic on the street, but it hit harder where it counted. By the next morning, Caleb Monroe had already turned the night into a clean record. He had the preserved footage, a written timeline, the identifiers he could confirm, and a list of exactly what he needed pulled from the agency side. He didn't treat it like a misunderstanding that would fix itself. He treated it like an event that would get minimized unless someone forced it to stay specific. The first wave was paperwork and oversight. Records requests went out fast and in the right order: dispatch logs, call notes, the operational checklists, the copy of the warrant, any supplemental documentation showing address verification steps, the roster of who was assigned, who approved the approach, and who made decisions on scene. Caleb also filed formal complaints through the channels that trigger tracking numbers, not the channels that trigger apologies. That detail mattered because the agency response started the way these things usually start: vague reassurance, broad language, and an attempt to frame it as a simple address mix-up with no real harm. Caleb didn't let them float above the facts. He answered with timestamps and video clips that matched specific actions to specific individuals. Then the internal review had a problem. The footage showed the order of events clearly: vehicles arriving with a heavy posture, commands to exit before documentation was presented, repeated refusal to display the warrant until a supervisor arrived, and the shift in behavior the moment the warrant was finally visible. It also showed something that reviewers can't ignore when it's recorded: the team treating procedure like defiance. When investigators pulled the warrant copy and compared it to the Monroe address, there was no wiggle room. The document did not authorize activity at that residence. That should have been the end of it. But the review kept going because the address mismatch wasn't the only issue. The team's decision-making became the issue. The review focused on who pushed escalation and why. It mapped the choices: who decided to surround the home, who decided to demand an exit first, who refused to present the warrant when asked repeatedly, and who tried to reframe lawful requests as obstruction. The more those decisions got pinned down, the more the lead agent became the center of gravity. And then the paper story started colliding with the video story. Internal reviewers compared statements, radio traffic, and draft summaries to what the cameras captured. Every time the narrative tried to soften the posture or the pressure, the footage pulled it back into reality. That's the difference between an internal memo and a recorded night. One can be rewritten, the other can't. The lead agent tried to defend the approach as standard operations under urgency. The problem was that urgency didn't explain the refusal to verify the address on record, or the push to get the occupant outside before showing documentation, or the attempt to leave without creating a traceable incident record. The supervisor's conduct landed differently. The review noted that once supervision arrived, the scene moved toward verification and disengagement. That didn't erase what happened, but it separated who escalated from who stabilized. The consequences started internally and then became unavoidable externally. The lead agent who drove the escalation faced major discipline tied to decision-making, conduct, and how the incident was handled after the mistake became clear. The agency couldn't publicly posture around it because the footage created a direct comparison between what was done and what policy required. The internal review didn't need assumptions. It had the sequence. Then came the civil side. Caleb and Natalie's documentation made it hard for anyone to argue there was no impact. A late-night perimeter at the wrong home, high-pressure commands, refusal to present documentation promptly, and an attempted quiet withdrawal without proper identifiers created exposure the agency could not shrug off as harmless. That is how the settlement number climbed. The case resolved with a $10 million settlement, not because anyone wanted headlines, but because the evidence wasn't debatable. The footage showed an operation executed at the wrong address, the pressure tactics used to force compliance before verification, and the shift toward retreat only after the paper was forced onto camera. After that, policy tightened in a way that made the agency admit the real lesson without saying it out loud. They implemented stricter verification steps before residential approaches, clearer rules about presenting warrants promptly when requested, stronger standards requiring address confirmation before demanding anyone exit a home, and a sharper emphasis on de-escalation when uncertainty exists, especially at night, where misinterpretation risk is highest. Caleb and Natalie didn't celebrate like it was a win over a person. They treated it like a win over a pattern. Their focus stayed on the same thing from the doorway to the settlement: procedure, documentation, oversight. And that's the point of this story. A lot of power relies on people freezing, panicking, or moving too fast. Caleb didn't do any of that. Natalie didn't do any of that. They kept the scene calm, forced verification, and built a record that outlived every excuse that came later. Now let me ask you something. If bright lights hit your home late at night and a team demanded you step outside before showing documentation, would you stay focused, or would the pressure push you into motion? Drop your thoughts in the comments and share the story with someone who needs a reminder that calm, cameras, and clear boundaries can change outcomes. And if you want more real, grounded stories about accountability and consequences, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel.
So he's walking out with merchandise. He won't show a receipt.
Sir, put the bag down and show me your receipt.
I paid minutes ago. Store policy isn't a law. What facts of theft do you have?
This is simple. Receipt and ID. Now,
I'm not consenting to a search, and I'm leaving unless you have lawful cause to detain me.
last time, receipt and ID or you're being detained.
What is...
A loss prevention employee thought he could stop a black man at an electronics store exit, turn a receipt demand into a public humiliation, and force compliance just by standing in the doorway. What he did not understand was that the calm man in the tailored charcoal suit holding a reinforced shopping bag was not just another customer he could push around, stall, and label suspicious. And at the exact moment, a young patrol officer stepped in and decided refusal meant guilt. The situation stopped being a store policy dispute and became a case that would ruin careers and force changes nobody wanted to make. At this moment, the channel wants to tell you this. We are genuinely grateful you chose to spend your time with us today, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments, city or state. And if you like stories where everyday power trips get exposed by cameras, paperwork, and real accountability, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, zoom out for a second. This happened at Apex Digital, an electronics store inside Canyon Ridge Marketplace in Riverside, California. It was the kind of place where people walked out with small bags that cost more than a month of groceries, and where staff watched hands more than faces. Most customers complied with the receipt checks because it felt easier than arguing. Most people did not realize that a store policy is not a law, and that a customer who already paid owned the property in their bag. Judge Julian Cross did realize that. He lived in systems that ran on clear rules, and he knew the difference between a request and a detention. He also knew how quickly a simple moment could turn into something bigger if the wrong person decided their ego mattered more than the facts. And there was something else. This entire incident was being recorded from multiple angles before it even reached its peak. Not by a news crew, not by an activist group, just regular people, phones out, because the energy in the air told them this was about to go bad. Here's how it started. Julian Cross was 50, black, and dressed like someone who had a reason to be dressed that way. Tailored charcoal suit, clean lines, no loud labels, but nothing about him looked cheap or careless. He was at Canyon Ridge Marketplace for a straightforward purchase at Apex Digital. He had come for specific items, not browsing. A high-end drive array and a secured laptop, both expensive, both boxed, both the kind of products stores treated like contraband even after payment. He moved through the store like someone who did not need to impress anyone. He asked for what he needed, waited for the associate to retrieve it, and stood at the counter while the transaction finished. It was normal retail, the kind of boring moment nobody remembers. He paid minutes before all this happened. He took the items, placed them into a reinforced shopping bag, built to hold weight without tearing, and headed toward the exit. No rushing, no scanning the room, no acting like he was getting away with something. Just a customer leaving with property he bought. That should have been the end. But at the exit, Derek Harlan stepped into his path. Derek was loss prevention, wearing a yellow polo that made him easy to spot. He was not a manager, not security with a badge, not anyone with actual authority outside the store's own rules. But he carried himself like the doorway belonged to him. He positioned his body so the automatic doors could not do their job, and he made Julian stop. Derek did not start with courtesy. He did not present it like a request. He treated it like an order. He told Julian to hand over the receipt because of policy. He framed it like there was no discussion, like Julian's only role was to comply. Julian stopped and kept his posture neutral. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform for the crowd. He made it simple. He had paid minutes earlier, the items were his property now, and he did not consent to any search or to showing a receipt. Then he attempted to walk around Derek and leave. That one move is what flipped Derek. Because Derek was not prepared for calm refusal. He was prepared for nervousness, excuses, apologies, scrambling for paper, maybe a little fear. When Julian did not give him any of that, Derek had nothing to hold on to. No confession, no uncertainty, no leverage. So Derek did what people do when they confuse policy with power and realize they are losing control. He escalated. Derek raised his voice and shouted for police. He claimed Julian was walking out with merchandise. He used the language that flips a switch in people's minds. He turned a paid purchase into a theft narrative. Not because he had verified anything, but because he needed a bigger authority to back him up. And then Officer Evan Rourke showed up. Evan was a young patrol officer who arrived from the vestibule area, close enough that he had clearly been nearby. He came in fast, eyes not on Derek's story, but on the bag. He saw a black man in a suit refusing a receipt demand, and he treated that refusal like evidence. Evan did not walk to the register to confirm the purchase. He did not ask the cashier or manager to verify. He took the loss prevention claim at face value and made the bag the center of the situation. He ordered Julian to drop the bag and show the receipt. He demanded Julian's identification so he could run him. Julian stayed level. He did not argue emotions. He argued reality. He explained clearly that a store receipt policy is not law, and that Evan needed specific, articulable facts of theft to lawfully detain him. That was the moment the crowd started to gather. People in the marketplace slowed down. A few shoppers who had been near the checkout area spoke up and said they had seen Julian pay. Someone lifted a phone higher to get a clear view. Then another, then another. It was not coordinated, it was instinct. Evan reacted to the phones the same way he reacted to Julian's refusal. He treated it like defiance. He waved people back and acted like recording was interference. He focused on controlling the space, controlling the narrative, controlling the optics. And because he had already committed to the idea that Julian needed to be put in his place, he started building a justification in real time. He moved closer into Julian's personal space, using posture and proximity as pressure. He repeated the demands. He pushed the situation toward a single outcome, compliance or punishment. Julian did not give him compliance. Julian stood still, kept his hands visible, and stayed precise. He refused the search. He refused the receipt demand. He refused to be treated like a suspect without cause. And that is where this part ends, because the next step was the one Evan could not take back. With multiple cameras rolling, with witnesses saying they saw Julian pay, and with Evan now feeling watched, he made the decision that turned small misconduct into a department problem. He reached for handcuffs. Officer Evan Rourke decided the refusal was the problem. He walked up focused on Julian Cross's bag, not on verifying the purchase. He ordered Julian to drop the bag and show the receipt. He demanded Julian's ID so he could run him. Julian didn't raise his voice. He stayed still and said he paid minutes earlier, the items were his property, and he didn't consent to a search or to showing a receipt. He also told Evan that a store receipt policy wasn't a law, and that Evan needed clear facts of theft to detain him. Evan took that as defiance. Instead of checking with the cashier, Evan kept repeating demands. Derek Harlan, the loss prevention employee, stayed at the doors and backed Evan up by insisting Julian was leaving with merchandise. People nearby started speaking up. 2 shoppers said they saw Julian pay at the register. Someone pointed toward the front lanes and said the store could confirm it right now. More phones came out because the officer was getting louder and standing closer. Evan waved people back and treated filming like a problem. He told them to step away and stop listening to what they were saying about the purchase. Julian stayed calm. He didn't argue with the crowd. He kept his hands visible and repeated that he wasn't consenting and that he was leaving. Evan moved in and grabbed Julian's arm. Julian didn't swing or try to run. He kept his balance and told Evan he wasn't resisting. Evan pulled Julian's arm behind his back anyway and pushed him against the glass near the entrance. Evan cuffed him tight. While doing it, Evan said Julian was resisting. He said it loudly so the crowd would hear it, even though Julian wasn't fighting. Evan then started adding reasons out loud to justify the arrest: disorderly conduct, obstruction, resisting. The situation had started over a receipt demand, and Evan turned it into a full arrest by labeling refusal as a crime. Derek went quiet once the cuffs were on. He had already gotten what he wanted: police control of the situation. Now the store employee wasn't the one in front of the cameras anymore. Bystanders kept saying they saw Julian pay. Evan ignored them and walked Julian outside. Evan took the shopping bag as property for the case, even though it contained boxed items from the store, and multiple witnesses were saying the purchase was real. Outside, Evan pushed Julian toward the patrol car and put him in the back seat. Julian stayed composed and kept speaking clearly, like he was making sure the record was clean. Evan drove him to the precinct like this was routine. But the arrest report and the booking process were about to force Evan to explain the original reason for the stop. And once Julian's ID was checked, the situation would change fast. Booking is where stories like this either get quietly buried or blow up into something that can't be contained. Evan Rourke walked Julian Cross into the precinct like he expected a quick process and a clean report. He talked like the arrest was justified. He treated the cuffs in the bag like proof that he was in control. At the desk, Sergeant Marisol Alvarez took one look at Julian's posture and the way Evan was presenting it, and she asked the basic question that should have been asked at the store. She asked what the detention was based on. Evan said Julian refused to show a receipt and wouldn't give ID, and that it turned into obstruction and resisting. Alvarez didn't nod along. She asked what the theft facts were. She asked whether anyone verified the purchase at the register. She asked what exact actions were being called resisting. Evan didn't have clean answers. He had labels. Alvarez kept her tone controlled, but she didn't treat it like normal, because refusal to show a receipt wasn't probable cause. And he didn't do what I told him wasn't a lawful reason to arrest someone. Julian stood there cuffed and composed. He didn't argue. He didn't insult anyone. He let the questions expose the thin foundation on their own. Then Alvarez moved to the inventory step. They took Julian's property for safekeeping: wallet, keys, phone, watch, the shopping bag, and the items inside. Everything got listed. When Alvarez checked Julian's identification, the mood changed immediately. It wasn't a small reaction. It was the kind of instant shift that happens when someone realizes this isn't just another messy stop. The ID confirmed Julian Cross was a United States federal judge. Alvarez didn't debate it and didn't stall. She ordered the cuffs removed right there. She told another staff member to step in and take over the paperwork. She told Evan to step away. Evan tried to talk through it like it was still his scene. Alvarez cut that off and separated him from the process. She also directed that Evan's equipment and reports be handled through supervision, not casually. Julian got his hands free and asked for his phone. He asked for the watch commander. He spoke clearly and gave one instruction that made it obvious he was already thinking about evidence preservation. He said all body camera and dash camera footage needed to be preserved. and that there were to be no gaps, no deletions, and no excuses about technical issues. Alvarez took that seriously. She didn't argue with him about it. She started making calls up the chain. That brought in Lieutenant Connor Bennett, the watch commander. Bennett came out with the practiced tone of someone who tries to fix problems fast. He offered an apology and called it a misunderstanding. He tried to frame it like it could be cleaned up with a quick release and corrected paperwork. Julian didn't accept that framing. He made it clear the issue wasn't confusion. The issue was that an officer took a receipt policy, treated it like law, escalated it into an arrest, and then tried to justify it by stacking charges. He also made it clear that the store never verified anything before he was cuffed and taken away. Bennett tried to keep it contained. Julian didn't let it stay contained. Julian made calls, not emotional calls, practical calls, the kind that trigger outside review, the kind that put people on notice that this will not be handled with a quiet internal note and we'll address it. Alvarez continued doing what she could control, separating what happened from what Evan claimed happened. She ensured property was properly documented. She ensured the timeline was noted. She ensured supervisors were aware of the original stated basis for the arrest. Evan, meanwhile, was suddenly in the position he put Julian in earlier, being questioned, being watched, and having his decisions examined. Julian was released without the charges Evan had been talking about in the storefront. The cleanup Bennett wanted couldn't happen cleanly, because there was too much video, too many witnesses, and now the identity of the person they arrested meant every shortcut would be scrutinized. When Julian walked out of the precinct, he didn't act like someone who had won. He acted like someone who was making sure the next steps happened correctly. And outside that building, the story was already moving. Because while Evan was trying to write his version of events, people at Canyon Ridge Marketplace were uploading theirs. By the next morning, the footage from Canyon Ridge Marketplace was everywhere. It wasn't one clip. It was multiple angles. The store entrance, the vestibule, the sidewalk outside. People had recorded the whole sequence. Derek Harlan blocking the doors, Officer Evan Rourke demanding a receipt like it was a legal requirement, witnesses saying they saw Julian pay, and Evan escalating anyway. The video spread fast because it was easy to understand. A calm, well-dressed black man was arrested over a receipt dispute. The officer didn't verify the purchase. The crowd tried to correct it. The officer ignored them. Then he cuffed the man and started calling it resisting. The Riverside Police Department went into damage control. They put out a statement that used careful wording. It avoided admitting wrongdoing. It leaned on review language. It avoided the part everyone could see. The original reason for the confrontation was a store receipt demand, not confirmed theft. That didn't work because people had eyes. Local reporters started asking basic questions. Why didn't the officer verify at the register? Why did the arrest happen without confirmed theft? And why were extra charges mentioned on scene when the underlying reason was a receipt refusal? The story grew because the video didn't leave much room for creative interpretation. Behind the scenes, the city got nervous for a different reason. Julian Cross wasn't just a regular victim who might give up after an apology. He understood records. He understood timelines. He understood how internal reports get written to protect the officer and how video cuts through that. And he made it clear from the booking desk that footage preservation was not optional. That one detail mattered, because missing footage becomes its own scandal. Julian's legal team moved quickly. They didn't build the case around outrage. They built it around steps that were skipped and actions that were not legally supported. They requested bodycam and dashcam footage, dispatch and radio traffic, the store's internal security video, the arrest report drafts and any edits. The case didn't stay focused on just Evan. It widened to the pattern that allowed a young officer to turn a receipt policy into handcuffs in front of a crowd without someone stopping it earlier. It raised questions about training, supervision, and how often refusal was being treated as probable cause. Apex Digital also got pulled into it. Their loss prevention practice became part of the story, blocking exits, treating receipt checks like a right instead of a request, calling police without confirming a purchase. The store couldn't pretend it was just a police problem when the whole thing started with their employee physically preventing a customer from leaving. As the investigation moved, Evan's situation got worse. Video made his report hard to defend. If he wrote that Julian attempted to flee, the footage showed Julian moving normally and trying to exit around a person blocking the doors. If he wrote that Julian interfered with an investigation, the footage showed Evan never verifying a theft at all before grabbing Julian. If he wrote resisting, the footage showed Julian not fighting, not striking, not trying to run. And the more Evan had to lean on vague language, the more obvious it became what happened. He punished a refusal and tried to cover it with charges. Internal Affairs opened a formal review. Outside oversight got involved. The city attorney's office tracked the story closely because they knew what juries do with clear video and bad decision-making. The department placed Evan on administrative leave. Then the next steps followed the usual path: equipment review, report review, interviews, and supervisors trying to explain why none of this was stopped sooner. Derek Harlan didn't escape it either. He was interviewed about why he blocked the doors, why he ordered a receipt instead of requesting it, and why he claimed Julian was walking out with merchandise without confirming what happened at the register. The store had to answer for what kind of loss prevention training leads to physical obstruction over a receipt. The city didn't want this in front of a jury. A jury would see the video first, then hear policy was treated like law, then hear the officer never verified the purchase, then hear the charges were stacked after the fact. And the city knew jurors tend to punish that behavior. So the city moved toward settlement. Not because they suddenly became moral, but because it was the safer option. A public trial would dig into complaint history, supervision failures, and how often similar stops happened to people who didn't have Julian's resources or position. The settlement came with money and conditions. Julian's side pushed for changes that mattered, not just a check. Clear direction that receipt refusal alone is not a detention basis. Training on lawful detention standards and articulation requirements. Stronger supervision review for arrests that start as non-compliance. Guidance on public recording so officers stop treating cameras like a threat. Documentation standards that match video reality, not ego. The department agreed because the alternative was worse. Evan's career collapsed the way it usually does when video and records line up against an officer. First leave, then discipline, then separation from the job. Whether it ended as termination or resignation, the result was the same. His name became attached to a case that departments don't want to inherit. And Julian Cross didn't do interviews to brag. He didn't need to. His impact was in the trail he forced them to follow. He refused to let it be called a misunderstanding. He refused to accept a quiet release as the solution. And he made sure the footage didn't disappear. That's what made this different. Because most people in Julian's position don't have the power to force the system to explain itself. He did. And once the record was locked in, the system had no clean exit. So here's the question for you. If you were Julian, would you have handed over the receipt just to avoid the conflict? Or would you have held the line the way he did? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you've ever been in a situation where someone tried to turn policy into control, share what happened. And if you want more realistic stories where cameras, procedure, and accountability expose abuse of power, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.
Sir, stop right there. We need to check you.
What's the reason?
Give me your identification.
I can be verified. I'm federal law enforcement on an authorized assignment. Call dispatch or call a supervisor and confirm.
No, ID first.
I'm offering the fastest way to resolve this in public. Verify me.
Lead, we can call it in. He's offering a supervisor contact. That's quick.
Not here. We're moving him.
Confirmed. Individual Special Agent Jamal Reed, authorized assignment.
All right, okay, we're good. Simple mix-up. It wasn't a mix-up when verification was offered and refused.
An ICE team led by Agent Nolan Briggs surrounded a black man in the Harborview Convention Center's main concourse. and acted like the stop was already solved. They blocked his path, tightened their circle, and started issuing commands like he was a confirmed grab. The man stayed controlled and kept trying to end it the fastest way possible by offering a direct verification route through dispatch and a supervisor. Briggs refused to verify anyway and pushed the encounter towards detention in the busiest, most recorded part of the building. What Briggs didn't know was that the man he was escalating on wasn't a target at all. He was Special Agent Jamal Reed, an undercover federal investigator on an authorized assignment. And this entire moment was being captured on ICE body cameras and bystanders' phones in a packed public space. At this moment, we want to tell you that we're incredibly grateful that you've chosen to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Now, real quick, tell us where you're watching from today, state or country. Drop it in the comments. And if you like stories where accountability comes from cameras, timestamps, and people staying calm under pressure, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Reed stood near a line of vendor banners and rolling suitcases, with people flowing around him like water. Briggs stood close enough to control Reed's space. 2 agents flanked Reed's sides. Another agent hung back, watching the crowd and scanning for anyone moving in. Reed kept his hands visible and told them he was a federal agent working an authorized assignment. He didn't argue about ego. He didn't raise his voice. He gave them options. He told them they could call dispatch. He told them they could call his supervisor. He told them exactly how to verify him fast. Briggs treated that like a trick. Briggs responded like Reed was trying to talk his way out of something, and he kept escalating the control. He demanded compliance first and verification later. He moved the stop from a quick check into a detention posture in public, with dozens of phones pointed at them. Here's the part people miss. The whole story wasn't about whether Reed could prove who he was. It was about whether Briggs would allow verification to happen at all. Before that moment, Reed's day had started like any other undercover job that required being invisible in plain sight. He arrived at Harborview mid-morning, dressed like a regular attendee. No tactical look, no loud confidence, just a casual outfit and a conference badge that matched his cover roll. He moved through registration, checked the room schedule, and walked the main concourse once to get eyes on the layout. He clocked where private security stood. He clocked where local police were posted. He clocked where cameras sat above the escalators and near the service hallway doors. His authorized assignment was tied to a federal investigation that touched the convention's vendor operations. Nothing dramatic, no movie stuff. It was the kind of case built on receipts, patterns, and quiet observation. Reed had a scheduled contact window and a location plan that depended on him staying calm and non-threatening. His job was to watch, document, and confirm identities connected to a wider inquiry. He also knew how stops like this could happen. So he carried a clean verification route in his head. Supervisor contact, dispatch process, field office line. He knew which details to give and which details to protect, because undercover work didn't mean he had the freedom to say everything in public. On the other side of the building, Nolan Briggs was running his own mission that day, and he ran it like the answer was always force first. Briggs was leading an ICE team assigned to the area for enforcement operations, tied to tips and follow-ups. That morning, his team got an anonymous call that claimed a suspicious man was near staff corridors, moving between vendor spaces, looking like he didn't belong, possibly using a badge that didn't match. The tip was vague, but it had the kind of language that makes people move fast, especially when the caller sounds confident. Briggs didn't slow down to verify the tip before going hands-on. He treated it like a green light. He pulled his team together and moved toward the main concourse. They didn't coordinate with convention security in a meaningful way. They didn't run a quick check through the on-site liaison before approaching. They walked in ready to control a person first and sort out facts later. One agent on the team, Priya Desai, wasn't comfortable with that approach. She wasn't a speech person. She didn't grandstand. She just asked practical questions the way experienced agents do when they've seen operations go bad. She wanted specifics about what the tip actually said. She wanted a description. She wanted to confirm if the target was supposed to be there. Briggs shut down the caution with urgency and rank. He pushed the team forward, and that's how Reed, an undercover federal agent doing his job, ended up surrounded in a crowded public concourse because someone made a call and someone else decided verification was optional. When Briggs's team made contact, Reed tried to end it the correct way. He told them he was federal. He told them he could be verified immediately. He told them to call dispatch and gave them a supervisor route that would take minutes, not hours. He stayed in place and kept his hands visible. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't posture. Briggs responded by narrowing Reed's options instead of checking them. He took Reed's calm as resistance. He treated Reed's offer to verify as stalling. Desai, standing slightly behind Briggs, looked like she wanted to intervene without stepping on a team lead in front of a crowd. Her body camera captured her tone shifting, the kind of shift that happens when someone realizes they're about to be attached to a mistake. Bystanders noticed fast. The second people saw the agents forming a tight circle. The phones came up. A woman near the food kiosks started recording from close range. A few feet away, someone else recorded from a higher angle near the escalator. You could tell this wasn't one camera. It was many, and it was all happening under bright convention lighting with clear lines of sight. Reed pointed out that they were in public, surrounded by witnesses, and that verification was the fastest and safest route for everyone. He offered the same solution again. Call it in, confirm, and move on. Briggs refused again. Briggs escalated control language into detention steps. He directed agents into positions that cut Reed off from his bag and phone. He signaled for hands-on control without making verification calls. He pushed the stop away from a simple identity check and toward moving Reed out of the open concourse. At that point, the stop stopped looking like caution and started looking like a decision. Here's the part people miss. When someone refuses verification repeatedly, it's not confusion, it's a choice. And cameras don't just capture what people do. They capture what they refuse to do. Reed stayed controlled and kept repeating the same procedural answer. Verify him through dispatch and a supervisor. He didn't threaten. He didn't bargain. He just kept offering the route that would end the stop clean. Briggs treated that calm like a challenge. Convention security started drifting closer, not aggressively, but close enough to be on record as present. People around them slowed down. The concourse flow tightened. You could see the moment the crowd realized this wasn't ending quickly. Briggs then pushed the encounter into the point of no return for the team's reputation. He moved it toward detention anyway, despite Reed giving him multiple clean chances to verify. And Reed understood something in real time. This wasn't about paperwork. This was about control. And Briggs was willing to be wrong in public as long as he didn't have to be corrected. Briggs pushed the stop past a quick check and into a detention posture in the middle of the concourse. He directed his agents to control Reed's movement and treat him like he was already identified, even though Reed kept giving them a clean verification path that would have ended the encounter in minutes. Reed told the team he was a federal agent on an authorized assignment and offered a supervisor contact and dispatch route. He did it the way the trained investigators do it in public. Enough information to verify, not enough to compromise an operation. He also made it clear he would not consent to being moved into a back area while still being misidentified. Desai, one of the agents on Briggs' team, pressed for the obvious step. Call it in and confirm. Her body camera captured that she raised verification as a solution, not an argument. Briggs rejected it and kept control-focused instructions going instead. That refusal mattered because it wasn't a missed step. It was repeated. The body cameras caught the sequence. Reed offered verification. Briggs declined. Reed offered again. Briggs escalated again. Phones were already up around them. A woman close to the group recorded steadily from a few feet away. Another angle came from higher, near the escalators. Convention security moved closer after noticing the attention, and the crowd slowed down. They asked what was happening, and Briggs responded by asserting federal authority and dismissing their involvement. Security did not intervene physically, but they stayed within earshot and sightline, which made the stop harder to control through narrative later. Briggs then tried to shift the location. He steered the situation toward a service hallway area where there would be fewer witnesses and less ambient recording. Reed refused to go voluntarily without identity confirmation. He did not become physical. He did not threaten. He kept his stance stable and kept repeating the same instruction. Verify first through dispatch and supervisor. Here's the part people miss. Once a person offers immediate verification and law enforcement refuses, the issue stops being confusion and becomes intent. Video makes that difference obvious. As the agents attempted to move Reed, the crowd reaction changed from curiosity to alarm. People started calling out that they were recording. Convention staff began making calls of their own. The incident was now linked to the venue, not just the agents, and that created its own urgency. Those calls reached the local field office fast. The report wasn't vague. It included the location, the crowd size, and the fact that multiple recordings were already happening. That combination forces escalation in an agency chain because it turns a field decision into a documented exposure problem. Supervisor Marisol Chen was notified and asked a direct question. Had they verified the person's identity yet? Briggs didn't have a clean answer because the verification step had been offered and ignored. Chen ordered the call to be made immediately. This time, Briggs couldn't stall. With the field office involved, the decision was no longer his. An agent contacted dispatch and ran the verification route Reed had provided. Confirmation came back quickly. Reed was exactly who he had said he was. Special Agent Jamal Reed, undercover, authorized assignment. The moment that confirmation landed, the detention had no procedural cover. The team had to release him right there, in the same concourse where they had surrounded him. There was no way to reframe it without the cameras contradicting them. Their own body cams matched the bystander footage, and dispatch logs anchored the timeline. Reed didn't argue for an apology in the moment. He went straight into preservation mode. He recorded the key times. When contact began, when he first offered verification, when Briggs refused, when the field office got involved, when dispatch confirmed, and when he was released. He identified the closest witnesses who had been filming and made sure names and contact details were captured. He also coordinated with convention security to ensure they documented the incident from the venue side, including which staff were present and which cameras covered the area. Then he moved on the body camera issue immediately. He made formal preservation requests through the proper channels, so the footage couldn't be quietly overwritten under normal retention cycles. He secured copies of bystander recordings directly instead of relying on posts or social media clips, because he wanted original files with intact timestamps and metadata. Desai's Bodycam became a key piece because it showed internal warning and refusal. It established that the option to verify was raised on scene and dismissed anyway. Briggs tried to treat the outcome like a simple mix-up and end it there. Reed didn't. He understood what the evidence now showed. An anonymous tip was treated as certainty. A black man was detained in public without basic verification. And the only reason it ended was supervisor intervention after outside pressure. Within hours, clips from the concourse were circulating. Not because someone edited a story around it, but because the raw sequence was hard to explain away. Multiple angles showed the same thing. Reed offered quick verification routes early, Briggs refused to verify, the stop escalated anyway, and the release only happened after the field office was pulled in. Convention staff filed their own incident notes because it happened on their floor, in front of their cameras, during a major event. Bystanders shared recordings with timestamps. Reed didn't rely on the internet version of the story. He built his own evidence package. He logged the timeline in plain order. First contact, first verification offer, each refusal, the attempt to move him off the concourse, the point the field office became involved, the dispatch confirmation, and the release. He attached the preservation requests he made for body camera footage. He secured original files from bystanders who filmed close enough for clean audio. He collected witness contact information while memories were fresh. Then he escalated it through formal channels. Reed filed complaints through the appropriate federal processes and then filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. The case didn't depend on opinions or interpretations. It depended on recorded steps. The central claim was simple. The team had repeated chances to verify identity fast, refused anyway, and detained him without lawful justification once verification was offered and available. Briggs's side tried to frame it as a good-faith stop based on an anonymous tip. That defense would have been stronger if the team had verified quickly and made a correction. The problem was, the footage showed the opposite. The recordings didn't show confusion. They showed refusal. Here's the part people miss. In court, what destroys a defense isn't usually the original suspicion. It's the moment someone is offered an easy, professional way to confirm facts and chooses not to. Discovery pulled in everything Reed expected. Dispatch logs, internal call records, body camera retention data, and supervisory notes. Reed's legal team didn't have to guess what happened. They lined up the timestamps across systems. Every time Reed offered a supervisor wrote, the body cams captured it. Every time verification was dismissed, it was recorded. The longer Briggs delayed the call, the weaker his position became, because the delay wasn't tied to safety or logistics. It was tied to control. Desai's footage became a key piece. It showed internal awareness that verification was available and sensible. It established that the refusal wasn't a misunderstanding shared by everyone on scene. It was a decision driven from the top of that team in that moment. As the case moved forward, the short-term consequences started landing before the trial. Briggs was pulled from frontline operations while internal review ran. The team's actions were reviewed against policy and training standards. The agency issued statements that avoided admitting fault but emphasized professionalism and procedure. That didn't stop the footage from shaping public understanding. People didn't need a press conference to interpret what they watched. Reed also faced real-world fallout that wasn't just legal. Undercover work depends on anonymity and routine. A public stop in a convention center, filmed at close range, created exposure risk. His agency had to evaluate the operational impact, adjust assignments, and document the disruption. That became part of damages because it tied the unlawful detention to real professional harm, not just embarrassment. When the trial arrived, it wasn't built around dramatic testimony. It was built around sequence. Reed's attorneys walked the jury through the concourse timeline in clean segments. They didn't argue feelings. They showed the offers to verify, the refusals, and the escalation. They matched body cam audio with bystander videos to confirm the same statements were captured from different angles. They then anchored the ending with dispatch confirmation timing, showing how fast it ended once someone finally followed the verification route Reed had offered from the start. Briggs testified and attempted to justify the detention as necessary for officer safety and investigation integrity. The problem was the recording showed Reed staying controlled and offering verification that reduced risk, not increased it. The jury was left with one question. If verification was available and would resolve the stop quickly, why refuse it repeatedly and detain anyway? The defense could not give an explanation that fit the record. The verdict came back unanimous for Reed. The judgment was $10 million. The award reflected not just the unlawful detention, but the documented refusal to verify, the public nature of the incident, and the foreseeable professional damage caused by exposing an undercover agent in a crowded venue. After the verdict, consequences moved fast. Briggs' career ended. He didn't get reassigned quietly. The case record was now public, time-stamped, and tied to a jury finding. The agency also faced pressure to address the team culture that allowed verification to be treated as optional. Disciplinary actions hit multiple levels. Not just the lead decision-maker, but supervision and training structures that failed to prevent the behavior or correct it earlier. Then came the reforms, because the case created a template that administrators couldn't ignore. Policy changes focused on 3 areas. 1, mandatory verification triggers. If a stopped person claimed law enforcement or federal affiliation and offered a supervisor or dispatch route, agents had to initiate verification promptly, unless a specific documented safety threat made it impossible in that moment. 2, supervisor oversight. Detentions based on anonymous tips in crowded public spaces required supervisor notification and documented approval when verification was available and refused. 3, longer camera retention. Body camera footage tied to stops, complaints, or identity disputes had to be retained longer, with automatic preservation flags when supervisor involvement or dispatch verification occurred. Reed didn't treat the outcome as a trophy. He treated it as a line in the sand. He returned to his work with a stronger set of protections for people who get misidentified and pushed around because someone decides control matters more than truth. And that's the point of this story. Like when someone offers a clean, professional way to verify, and the person in power refuses, the refusal becomes the story. Cameras don't just capture mistakes. They capture choices. So here's what we want to ask you. If you were standing in that concourse and you saw a stop escalate, while the person kept offering a simple verification route, what would you have done? Would you have filmed, stepped back, called venue security, or tried to find a supervisor? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever been in a situation where you had to stay calm while someone tried to push you into a box that didn't fit, share what helped you hold your ground. And if you want more stories where accountability comes from receipts, procedure, and people refusing to be bullied into silence, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.
Hey, hold up. Who are you and why are you in here? Let me see your ID.
I'm here for an appointment. I have my military ID and my orders. Tell me what you
Keep
need.
your hands where I can see it. I said I have ID and orders. Turn around. You're being detained.
Detained for what?
Grab me. I'm not resisting. I'm trying to comply safe.
2 U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police officers thought they could treat a black man in full Navy dress blues like he was lying about who he was, put hands on him in a packed medical center lobby, and talk their way out of it afterward. What they did not expect was that the man they were pushing around was Senior Chief Andre Calloway, an active-duty Navy SEAL who stayed calm, stayed compliant, and still ended up taken down and cuffed, while strangers started recording from every angle. And before we get into how fast this spiraled, we want to tell you this clearly. We're incredibly grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Now, quick question. Where are you watching from today, city, and state? And if you watch these stories because you believe accountability matters, hit like and subscribe, because this one shows exactly what happens when cameras, policy, and public pressure collide with bad policing. This happened at 6:30 a.m. inside the Savannah Area Veterans Affairs Medical Center. Early morning, low traffic, people checking in for appointments, staff starting their shift. The place ran on routine and quiet urgency. And in the middle of that, 2 officers turned a basic contact into a use of force scene in front of patients and employees with phones up and body cameras, capturing more than they meant to capture. Senior Chief Calloway arrived the way disciplined people arrive. Early, prepared, he had his military ID on him. He had travel orders on him. He wore full Navy dress blues because he was moving through official stops and wasn't dressed to look casual. He wasn't loud. He wasn't looking for attention. He was focused on getting where he needed to go The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police officers in that lobby had real authority in that building. They could stop people, question them, detain them, and escalate quickly if they claimed a security reason. And in a medical setting, most people don't push back. They comply fast because they're there for care, not conflict. That's the imbalance in places like this. The uniformed officer controls the pace, and the patient usually tries to disappear from the problem. That morning, Officer Derek Walsh noticed Calloway and moved toward him first. Officer Evan Krieger stayed close behind, positioned like backup. The contact began as a standard approach. Walsh demanded identification and wanted an explanation for why Calloway was there. Calloway complied. He kept his hands visible. He didn't argue. He indicated he had identification and orders and was prepared to show them. But Walsh's tone shifted fast. It stopped sounding like verification and started sounding like accusation. He treated Calloway's calm like it was suspicious. He kept pressing even as Calloway moved to provide what was requested. Krieger watched the exchange and stayed close enough to step in if it turned physical. This is where the power game starts. An officer decides early whether he is going to accept information or try to dominate the person giving it. Walsh chose domination. He talked over Calloway's answers and acted like the proof wasn't going to matter. The lobby noticed. A receptionist looked up. A patient in the seating area stopped what they were doing. A veteran near the entrance focused in, watching the officers instead of Calloway, like he'd seen this kind of posture before. A bystander started recording from the side. Then another phone came up from farther back. That changed the math immediately. The officers weren't just controlling one person anymore. They were creating evidence in front of a room full of witnesses. Body camera audio later captured the most revealing part. While Calloway was complying and prepared to present documentation, biased remarks were made, suggesting the officers believed his uniform and identity might be fake. It wasn't careful verification. It was disbelief pointed in one direction. Then Walsh escalated physically. He moved from questioning into force. Calloway didn't strike. He didn't threaten. He didn't resist. He stayed compliant. Walsh still drove him into a takedown in the middle of the lobby and put him in handcuffs. Krieger stayed involved and close enough to stop it, but he did not intervene to prevent the takedown. At 6:30 in the morning inside a Veterans Affairs Medical Center, a black Navy SEAL in dress blues ended up on the ground in handcuffs, while multiple people recorded. The room shifted. People reacted, but most didn't feel safe stepping into it directly, not with U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police officers controlling the scene. The phones kept rolling anyway. That mattered. Calloway stayed controlled after the cuffs went on. He kept his movements minimal. He kept insisting, through measured behavior and steady compliance, that he had what they demanded from the beginning. He didn't give them a reaction they could use to justify what they already did. And Walsh, trying to hold the scene like he owned it, didn't seem to realize the story was already leaving the building through other people's cameras. The moment the supervising sergeant walked into that lobby, the whole temperature changed. Not because people suddenly felt safe, because everyone could tell this was the first person in the chain of command who understood what was happening in real time. 2 U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police officers had put a compliant man in military dress blues and handcuffs in public with multiple phones recording and body cameras running. Walsh tried to control the narrative immediately. He stayed close to Calloway and kept acting like the cuffs were routine. Krieger hovered nearby, quiet, letting Walsh do the talking, the kind of posture officers take when they want to look involved without owning decisions. The sergeant did not match their energy. He did not come in loud. He came in procedural. He looked at Calloway first, not like a suspect, but like a person who needed the situation stabilized. Then he looked at Walsh and Krieger and made them explain what legal reason they believed they had to detain him. Walsh gave the usual officer framing. He tried to make it sound like uncertainty, safety, and verification. But the scene in the lobby did not match that explanation. Calloway had not been running. He had not been yelling. He was not trying to leave. He had been doing exactly what a person does when asked for ID. The sergeant then did what should have been done before anyone put hands on him. He instructed Calloway to present his documents. Calloway produced his military ID and his travel orders. Clean, immediate, no story, no attitude, just proof. The sergeant reviewed them carefully but quickly, like someone who had looked at enough identification to know what he was seeing. He verified the information against what the officers claimed they were unsure about. The timeline, the identity, the legitimacy. It took minutes. That was the moment Walsh's position collapsed. Because once the documents were verified, the entire justification for the cuffs evaporated. There was no longer any argument for continuing the detention, and the lobby had watched the whole progression. The sergeant ordered the handcuffs removed. Walsh hesitated in that subtle way officers do when they know they went too far but still want to appear in control. The sergeant did not allow the hesitation to turn into delay. The cuffs came off. Calloway stood up calmly, adjusted his uniform, and stayed composed. No celebrating, no big reactions, just control. The people recording caught that too, and it mattered. When someone is treated like a threat and responds with discipline, it makes the force look worse, not better. The sergeant then separated the scene the way a supervisor does when he realizes a situation is now a liability. He directed Walsh and Krieger away from Calloway. He placed himself in the middle. He asked for the basics again, but this time it was about documentation, not dominance. While that was happening, the bystanders kept filming. The phones didn't go down just because the cuffs came off. Some people were speaking quietly to each other, comparing what they just saw to what they had seen before in that building. And you could tell this wasn't isolated in their minds. It fit something familiar. The sergeant recognized that, too. He didn't try to stop people from recording. He didn't posture for the cameras. He focused on containment and reporting. He contacted command staff immediately. Not later, not after the shift. Right then, while the incident was still fresh, while everyone was watching, while the officers were still on scene, and the evidence was still running. He also made it clear that all footage needed to be preserved. Body cameras, lobby cameras, any available hallway feeds, any radio traffic, and any reports tied to the incident. That decision was crucial because the first way departments protect bad behavior is by letting time and poor documentation blur the story. This time, that didn't happen. Command staff treated it like a priority because it was already becoming one. Even before news outlets touched it, the incident had the two things agencies fear: multiple angles of video from the public and audio from body cameras that would not sound good in any review. The department removed both Walsh and Krieger from duty pending review. That step did not happen quietly either, because people inside that building saw the shift in posture. They saw supervisors taking over. They saw the two officers no longer controlling the space. Calloway's chain of command was notified. That is the part a lot of civilians don't realize. When an active duty service member is involved, especially someone traveling under orders, it doesn't stay local. It becomes official and it becomes shared across systems that do not care about local excuses. The fallout started the same day. Internal Affairs opened a case. Not a casual complaint review, but a formal investigation, because there was no clean way to explain a forceful takedown and handcuffing when the person had been compliant and could prove identity within minutes. Because Calloway was military, and because the incident involved credibility issues around his identity and orders, NCIS was brought into the loop. And because this was a use of force incident with racial bias indicators and no valid basis for detention showing on its face, it drew federal civil rights attention. This is where the story stopped being about a bad morning in a lobby and became a test of whether a federal facility's police department could be held to the same standards it expected everyone else to follow. And while Walsh and Krieger tried to lean on the usual defenses, the problem was simple. The evidence was already preserved and the public already had it. Once the department locked down the footage, the case stopped being about opinions and started being about timestamps. Internal Affairs pulled the full body camera files from Walsh and Krieger, not clips, the entire recordings. They also requested the Veterans Affairs Medical Center lobby cameras, hallway feeds, and any audio tied to radio traffic. At the same time, they began collecting witness names from the lobby staff and patients who had been there at 6:30 a.m. And because Calloway was active duty traveling under orders, and the incident involved officers questioning the legitimacy of his identity, NCIS was brought in as a partner on the review. A federal civil rights investigation also opened because the detention happened in a federal facility. The force was significant compared to the situation, and the body camera audio included biased remarks that went beyond normal verification. Investigators rebuilt the incident in a straight line. They looked at what triggered the contact, what Calloway did in response, what officers claimed they saw, and what the video actually showed. They compared that against U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police detention standards and use of force policy, including what officers were required to articulate before moving to physical control. The biggest problem for Walsh and Krieger was that the decision to escalate did not match the evidence. Calloway's behavior on video showed compliance. He stayed in place. He did not attempt to flee. He did not threaten. He did not make aggressive moves. He indicated he had identification and orders and was prepared to provide them. The public videos from bystanders backed that up from different angles, and the lobby cameras confirmed the spacing, the timing, and the officers' positions. Then investigators focused on the officers' stated reason for continuing the detention. Walsh's explanation leaned on vague suspicion, as if uncertainty itself was enough. But investigators pushed it to the legal standard. What specific objective facts supported detaining Calloway in the first place? That is where the case fell apart. There was no credible safety threat, no reported crime tied to Calloway, no evidence he was trespassing, and no behavior that justified forcing him to the ground. The biased body camera remarks made it worse. The audio captured the officers treating his uniform and identity as inherently doubtful in a way that didn't line up with routine verification. It wasn't a careful check. It sounded like they were looking for a reason to disbelieve him, even while he was giving them exactly what they demanded. That mattered for two reasons. First, it helped explain why verification did not happen before force. The officers had already decided he was not legitimate. Second, it put the incident into civil rights territory, because the disbelief tracked to identity and race, not to conduct. Investigators then reviewed the force itself. They evaluated the takedown and handcuffing against the level of threat present. With no active resistance, no flight, and no safety risk visible on the footage, the force was ruled unjustified. The handcuffing was also ruled improper once it was clear the detention itself had no valid basis. Then they looked at Krieger. Krieger did not initiate the takedown, but the footage showed he was close enough to see what was happening and had the opportunity to intervene. Policy required intervention when force became excessive or unlawful. He did not step in. He stayed with Walsh and helped maintain control after the takedown instead of stopping it. That is why investigators cited Krieger for failing to intervene. The investigation also looked at what happened after the incident, because that's where officers often try to repair the story. Investigators compared written reports to the footage. They flagged contradictions in how Walsh described Calloway's behavior versus what the video showed. They also noted how quickly the narrative shifted once the supervising sergeant verified the military ID and travel orders. The sergeant's verification timeline showed that the truth was available early, and the escalation happened anyway. As the case grew, the department had to deal with two realities at the same time: internal policy violations and external scrutiny. The administrative actions came first. Both Walsh and Krieger were removed from duty during the review, then terminated once findings were finalized. Their law enforcement certifications were either revoked or suspended, depending on the specific authority involved in credentialing, because the violations went beyond a bad judgment call and into misconduct tied to unlawful detention and improper force. Supervisors were not spared either. The investigation reviewed prior complaints and prior use of force concerns tied to the same officers. It found failures in earlier oversight, including instances where warning signs should have triggered corrective action but did not. That resulted in discipline for supervisors connected to prior inaction. The department could not credibly frame this as a single bad moment if earlier patterns had been ignored. By this point, the incident was already public. Bystander video had spread, and people recognized the uniform, the setting, and the tone. The department was forced to preserve and disclose more information than it would have in a normal complaint case, because multiple agencies were watching and the public had enough footage to challenge any watered-down explanation. What started as two officers treating a man like he didn't belong ended as a formal record stating the detention had no valid basis. The force was unjustified. One officer failed to intervene, both lost their jobs, and leadership faced consequences for not acting sooner. Once the investigations ended and the terminations became official, the department tried to treat it like a closed chapter. But for Calloway, the real issue was never just the firing. It was what happened to him in a public federal facility on camera while he complied. So he filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. The case centered on a simple claim. He was detained without a valid legal basis, forced to the ground without justification, and handcuffed despite compliance, while officers made biased remarks questioning whether his uniform and identity were real. The lawsuit also targeted the department's supervision failures, because the investigation had already documented prior warning signs and inaction. The department's attorneys had one problem they could not solve with careful wording: the footage. Multiple bystander videos showed the public view. Lobby cameras showed the spacing and timing. Body camera audio captured what the officers said while they thought they were in control. And the supervising sergeant's actions created a clear reference point, because he verified Calloway's military ID and travel orders quickly and ended the detention immediately. That timeline made it hard to argue this was a reasonable mistake. As the case moved forward, Calloway's legal team did what good civil rights teams do. They made the story procedural and measurable. They focused on the decision points: why the contact started, what facts were present, what the officers did next, and what policy and law required at each step. They treated it like a checklist the officers failed. The department tried to defend the officers' choices as uncertainty and safety, but the evidence didn't support that. No valid basis for detention meant the force had no foundation. And the failure to intervene finding against Krieger narrowed the department's room to argue it was just one officer acting alone. Then the federal oversight pressure increased. When a case has clear video evidence, a formal finding of unjustified force, and civil rights implications, agencies start making decisions based on risk. A trial would have meant sworn testimony, public cross-examination, and deep discovery into training, complaint history, supervision, and past incidents. It would have pulled command staff into the spotlight, not just the two officers. That is when the settlement discussions became serious. The case ended in a multi-million settlement. The money was part of it, but the bigger impact was what the settlement forced the agency to do next. The department was pushed into stricter oversight and accountability reforms tied directly to what went wrong in that lobby. They tightened use of force review. They strengthened body camera compliance rules and consequences for missing footage or delayed uploads. They expanded training around detention standards, bias indicators, and how quickly verification becomes a pretext when an officer already made up his mind. They also increased expectations for intervention, because Krieger's failure to step in became an example of how harm happens, even when one officer is driving and the other is just going along. They also had to address supervision. It wasn't enough to punish the two officers. The findings had already shown that earlier inaction helped create the environment where they felt comfortable escalating. The reforms included stronger early warning tracking, more consistent review of complaints and force patterns, and clearer discipline when supervisors ignore repeated problems. Inside the building, the changes were visible over time. Officers became more careful about articulating reasons for stops and detentions. Supervisors became more involved early when a situation started drawing attention. Body cameras became less optional in practice because everyone understood what happens when policy and reality don't match. And staff and patients became more willing to record because they had seen proof that recording could matter. Calloway's personal outcome wasn't framed as a victory lap. He didn't need validation from strangers to know what happened. What mattered was that the official record matched the reality. The officers were removed, and the agency was forced to change practices that created the harm in the first place. That is the part people miss when they watch incidents like this. Accountability is not just a firing. It's the full chain of consequences. Evidence preserved, findings documented, careers ended, certifications affected, supervision questioned, and procedures changed. So the next person isn't left alone in the same situation. Now here's the question for you watching. If you were in that lobby, would you have recorded, spoken up, or stayed quiet because it was a federal facility with police present? And if you've ever been in a situation where you stayed calm and someone still escalated on you, what did you do afterward to protect yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story hit you, share it with someone who thinks recording and oversight don't matter. And make sure you subscribe because this channel is going to keep telling the stories where dignity holds the line and accountability actually shows up.